Hi, everybody. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas. And I think by the time you're hearing this podcast, I will have celebrated 48 years in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. My birthday is December the 27th. And I just want to say a word of tremendous gratitude for all of those teachers I've had who have gone to the big meeting in the sky and are holding a place for me. So I'm not anxious to join them, but we'll get there when we get there. We're doing a series on I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. So I've heard that for so many years in the program. And what I thought would be fun is to visit with people who follow that description of themselves, but some of us who have found within religion something that offers us something deeper and different than we find in the program. So that's the idea behind this particular series. Going to interview some Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and the whole gamut. And for this episode, I am really blessed to have a man from the Orthodox Judaism strain of things. His name is Yisrael, and then Israel, and he's coming to us from Jerusalem, and is a longtime member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we are going to have some fun because Yisrael is also a stand-up comic, so in his other life. And how he joins those two together is just amazing. So Yisrael, I want to welcome you to the podcast and thank you for being with us. And I'm going to turn it over to you pretty much because you don't know where you're going. Here's what I want to hear from you a little bit on how a nice guy like you got into AA, and then start us down the very long and circuitous road that you have traveled on your spiritual journey. Okay? You're on, brother.
Okay, great. Sure. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Bill, Father Bill, and I'm not sure if how you like to be addressed, but okay, great, fair enough. As you said, my name is Yisrael. I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober since the 14th of February, 1980. I will celebrate. I celebrated 40 years of continuous sobriety last February. Just briefly to kind of identify as an alcoholic, I picked up my first drink when I was 9 years old. I waited. I could have used a drink on the way to kindergarten. I actually could have used a drink any single day of my entire life before I picked up my first drink. I didn't know it at the time, but alcohol, when I took it, was an answer to a question. It was a solution to a problem. My sponsor, a man named Clancy I, who just went to the big meeting in the sky this summer, used to say that we alcoholics aren't people with drinking problems. People with drinking problems stop drinking and they stop having problems. We're people with living problems. I have to remember that. Alcohol was a treatment to my alcoholism. I started drinking because I was sober. In fact, or I like to say I was sober when I started drinking. In fact, I started drinking because I was sober. I was treating sobriety with alcohol. So for me to simply think that stopping drinking would be sufficient, it just wasn't. It just isn't. So that's what I need to remember, that alcohol was so powerful for me that buying a case of beer and throwing it in the trunk of the car made me feel better. I did not have to drink alcohol. I just had to have access to alcohol. And I drank for 7 years. I stopped drinking when I was 16 years old. I was in the middle of my junior year at Archbishop John Carroll High School for Boys. As you mentioned, I'm an Orthodox Jew today. I started out in Alcoholics Anonymous as an Irish Italian Catholic kid from Philadelphia. And what happened to me, now I can't promise that if you work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll end up an Orthodox Jew, but I did. That's a bit of a joke, but it's true too. What happened is that I got sober and I started to worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and thank God I was able to stay sober. It was a bit of a struggle working the steps at such a young age because people kept telling me I was so lucky not to be drinking. I didn't think I actually needed all 12 steps. I thought maybe between 6 and 9 would be sufficient for someone of my high caliber of intellect and good looks. And it turned out I needed all 12 steps, and it took me a while to get them all into action in my life. And what happened was, just to cut to the chase, is that at about 14 years sober, my sponsor said to me, I think you need to have a deeper and more, I don't like to use words like authentic because I don't want to diminish what the work that I had done. I think it was entirely important to have been sober each of those days along the way, so that when I finally had this most profound experience, I was a sober member already and very much in the game. And he said, look around, seek out the people that seem to have had interesting spiritual experiences to you, whether they're in AA or whether you find books about their lives, whatever it is. And that set me on the road to Judaism. I like to say I wouldn't be a Catholic today if I weren't a Jew. I was very much already. And although I did make in sobriety, I made an attempt to go back to mass at high school at lunchtime. I can't explain why, and I don't want to defend why. Christianity and Catholicism in particular, though I did try other forms of Christianity, did not speak to me.
Right.
And
it's your path.
Yeah.
Individuals
I
find our path.
I have a friend who's a devout Catholic who often says there's many paths up the mountain.
That's right.
And, they all arrive in the same place, in my estimation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a theologian. I'm not an authority. I'm not a representative of Judaism, nor am I a representative of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm just simply a member. And I very much believed early in sobriety that me and any one of you are a power greater than me. And I need a power greater than me to affect recovery from Alcoholics Anonymous, from alcoholism in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so on any given day, I need to remember that me and any one of you is sufficient to start that exchange or that attempt to establish contact with a power greater than myself. Now, that was not enough for me to go for 40 years. I wanted ritual. I wanted to be part. I had a lot of friends. I lived in Los Angeles from when I was 10 years sober in 1990 till when I was 20 years sober. And I had a lot of friends that kind of built their own thing. We talked about it a little, you and I yesterday when we spoke about how, many members of AA, they kind of have a routine. They pray a little, they read a few, daily books, and they have their own thing. And I had friends that did that. They had Buddhist prayer altars, and they had, but the iconography of the prayer altar wasn't Buddhist, it was Christian. I would tell them, you can't do, they'd add crystals. I'd say, you can't do that. They'd say, I do it. I wanted something that was established, something that was older than me, something that was, something that was proper, I don't want to use judgmental words, but I want to say that, it very much was, when I first converted to Judaism, it was in the Reform community, the most liberal community in America. And what happened was, I was sitting one day with a friend and I said, isn't it amazing? And we're saying a prayer that they've said for, I think I said thousands of years. She said, it's probably more, hundreds of years. And she said, it's not the actual prayer, it's about a third of the actual prayer. And that sent me on. And then I went on a further search and I landed in the conservative community, which is the middle ground. And then finally in the Orthodox world, and moved here to Israel some 20 years ago. I like the idea that I belong to a community that is steeped in tradition and ritual. I rebel against that ritual at times. I'm not the most Orthodox Jew in the world, but I keep kosher. I don't mix milk and meat. I keep Shabbat in a traditional way. I do not use technology on Shabbat. I don't turn lights on and off on Shabbat. I don't cook on Shabbat. I don't travel in a car on Shabbat. Like, I pray 3 times a day. I attempt to pray with a minyan, a group of 10, 3 times a day. When my mother died, I said Kaddish for a year, though technically speaking, as a convert, my parents aren't my parents. Abraham and Sarah are my parents. But, I have a saying, my wife says I say it too much. I often say, if I live my life in such a way that what God wants to talk to me about after I die is that I said Kaddish for my Catholic mother, I will have lived a very good life. You know what I mean? Like, but believe me, the things I've done, the last thing God is going to want to talk about is my saying Kaddish for my non-Jewish mother. Anyway, I'm very steeped in ritual and tradition, and I love that. But I'm also an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to remember that, and I always want to remember that I came to religion to deepen my spirituality, and it's kind of a litmus test for me in my religion. Is this practice? Sometimes I do it whether it is or not, but the question is this practice serving my spirituality?
Mhm.
I I I believe that Jewish law set out, some 3,500, 5,000 years ago to to establish what is God's will for us and what does God want us to do. They were, I believe, at the heart of it, they are attempting to establish what God wants us to do on a daily basis. In other words, how do we have conscious contact with God?
Exactly.
Now, after decades and centuries of persecution and male hierarchy, of course that is buried in a lot of bad human behavior. We see that in things that are far younger than 3,000 years old. So, but I believe at the core that's what they're shooting for, and I want that kind of ritual. I want that kind of tradition in my life. I've been to visit the graves of the Hasidic masters in the Ukraine. I find that very powerful, very powerful. You know, I'm also, and I started to say it, and then I backed off it. I believe in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to. One of the most powerful things for me is to remember that on that day when I arrived in February of 1980, there were people there. There were dozens of people there, and they weren't people that had just gotten sober. They
Mhm.
weren't the lowest level on the period marketing scheme. They were people with decades of sobriety that had well-established lives, that were busy people, that had families and businesses and jobs and careers, and they still made time to show up in Alcoholics Anonymous for the newcomer. And I never want to forget that. I want to remember that, and I want to be there for the newcomer. Somebody is having their last drink today,
Yes.
and they may show up at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous tomorrow. And as much joy and fun as I get from my religion, I don't want to forget how I got my religion.
And I heard you speaking earlier of a deep sense of disconnection, and that was what the alcohol was at least numbing in you. And and this was my experience when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, it was these people understood me, and they were there for me, and they were inviting me to life. I wasn't sure I wanted to go.
Right, right. Absolutely.
Now it's like I'm giving up my best friend here, you
I
know?
have I have a friend who passed away, a man named Scott R., who was a longtime sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Scott used to say, alcoholism is contagious. We catch it through our ears.
Mm,
And that was my experience. I came to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because a dear friend of mine had gotten sober, but I didn't come into my first meeting believing I was alcoholic. I didn't even know what an alcoholic was. I just knew that Lizanne had stopped drinking. And I sat in that meeting. It was actually my second meeting. And I listened to those people talk about themselves. On the one hand, they shared their emotional and their spiritual and their psychological nature. And on the other hand, they said they were alcoholics. And I was able to listen to them and identify with their feelings of a psychological and an emotional and a spiritual nature, and then make the connection for myself. If they're alcoholic, based on what they said about themselves, I'm just like them. I guess I'm alcoholic too. And that's how I believe I caught alcoholism through my ears.
there's a difference. I feel like live in two worlds. I live in my recovery world, and I understand, and people understand me in a certain way over there. And like yourself, ritual and ceremony was extremely important to me. And I was missing that in my 12-step world. And that was one of the major things that I went in search of, uh, and found through a religious connection that worked for me. You know, I was also in Israel. I mentioned on our call the other day, you know, I worked on a kibbutz for 6 months. I was a spiritual searcher,
Mm.
and I got a lot of the spirituality in AA, but I was missing some of the devotional elements. Could you speak to that? Because I hear you saying very similar things in terms of the ritual and the scripture and the depth of participation that you can find on that side of your life that you don't get in the program.
Yeah, I often I feel like what I found in Judaism was that not necessarily a community uh, of believers, so to speak, but a community of searchers,
Mhm.
and kind of dedicated searchers to finding a way to be in relationship with God. And although I think that's underlying Alcoholics Anonymous, and my membership in Alcoholics Anonymous allows me to be in the position to join that community, it's more focused in a certain way as a community in religious ritual and seeking relationship. Now, it's not always successful. It's filled with human beings too. Um, but I think that well, I mean, I think, you know, Bill Wilson was onto something when he said that AA was a spiritual kindergarten. It is a spiritual kindergarten, and kindergarten is incredibly important when you're in kindergarten. But nobody stays in kindergarten until they go off to college because it's so interesting. And that's not, I don't mean to downplay or to say anything negative about AA in any way. I think kindergarten is incredibly important, you know. It's not meant to be. I love that AA is not, there's no advanced AA. I love that there's not steps 13 through 24 for those of us that have more than X amount of or X number of decades. I'm very much in the 12 steps. They keep revealing, you know, they say there's 70 faces to the Torah, that if you look at it again, and that's why that each year the Torah portions are studied. Everybody has studied those portions before. Everybody has read the commentators before. Yes, people are writing new commentators, but people garner new things from the old commentaries. I think that's true in my religion. I think it's also true in my AA experience. The beauty of AA is it doesn't insist that anyone can, you know, you and I have, if we sat down, we have diametrically opposed religious ideas. Now, we have found a way to talk as religious people in respectful and understanding methods. But there are those in our religions that would frown upon such a conversation. What I love about AA is it continually protects the right of the individual to believe and say what they want.
That's probably one of the strongest elements of the program and why it has succeeded. Not to be all things to all people, but to be the line of salvation for the alcoholic who is dying,
Yeah.
and how to keep it simple and pure enough, and not complicated, so that he or she can find it and grasp onto it and save their lives. But like you say, it is a kindergarten, and the book itself says, you know, find out where religious people are right. Go get some books. Go read some things. You know, uh,
Yeah.
the worst thing, Wilson said, one of the worst things that we could ever do is turn AA itself into a religion.
Well, I think once it becomes a religion, then there are people that are doing it right, and there are people that are doing it wrong,
Right.
and there are things that disqualify you, right? And that the beauty for me of AA is that that doesn't exist. We continually, you know, the in working with others, it says, let the new man decide what he believes. He can believe anything he wants as long as it makes sense to him. That's not how religion works. If someone, if someone comes to Judaism and says, we believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that doesn't count in Judaism as a Jew. I imagine, and I'm guessing, if someone comes to Christianity and says, I love your community, guys, I just don't believe Jesus is the Savior, I think that disqualifies them. Because religions have borders and rules and things that separate in and separate out.
That's right.
Thank God, after, I believe that I'm an alcoholic, then I can believe and say whatever I want.
Yeah. But can spirituality be too loose, too ungrounded?
I mean, I would say yes. That's why I sought out religion. But I don't tell that to the guy who prays the doorknob. If the book says, if the doorknob concept makes sense to him, then it's good for him. That's, I think, the secret and the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous is that it allows each of its members, I happen to be one of these book guys. I like to take guys through the book. I like to read the book. I read the book the way I read the Talmud. What did he mean when he said this? Why didn't he say that? The next person might just want to go to a Tuesday night meeting, have a cup of coffee, say their prayers every day. I don't know how they, I know people in AA that I say to myself, if I had their program, I'd be drunk. But I don't have to have their program. I can have my program.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have no opinion on outside issues. You do.
Right. Yes. Yes. We as Alcoholics Anonymous do not. But I, as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, although I seek to keep those to myself, because I don't want to, I think that, I think there's two anonymities spoken of in AA. The 11-step anonymity at the public level. That's why we're not using my last name. But I think there's another anonymity of the 12th tradition, which speaks to the humility of just everybody is just a member, and you're a priest, a pastor, and I'm a religious Jew. I come to meetings with my hat on and my hat under my hat and my strings hanging out of my clothes. But that's who and what I am. I try to refrain from having any position in AA which may stop someone from reaching out to me if they need help.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just political, religious, positions. That can just be a strongly worded opinion about how someone should work the steps.
Right. Over time, Yisrael, and I find this for myself. Let me speak for myself, and then you comment. I can get away with less and less over time. I could get away with a lot in the beginning, and as my relationship with God and developed and deepened, more was being asked of me. And I see in yourself, as you have progressed from a very liberal to more Orthodox in your views, and in your relationship with God tightens over time. Does it not? Has it not for you? Has it? Talk about that.
Yeah, I think certainly it has. I mean, I think that I am certainly. I think there's something of a dichotomy, though. I think as I certainly things affect me more deeply. The things that I am resentful, the things that I'll write on a 10-step resentment list today would not have even registered. I'm dealing with character defects today that would not have even registered as a character defect 20 years ago, 25 years ago. There's certainly an idea. You use the word tightening. People talk about the road narrowing. I think that's true. Yeah. But I think what's also true is what the book says, join us on the broad highway. I think in many ways, what looks like tightening is actually not a loosening per se, not to use that word, but a broadening. I was much more judgmental of who should do what and how they should do it. And as an early member of AA, I was definitely a member of the AA police force. And we were an undercover group of covert operatives who were out to stop people from doing AA the wrong way.
Yes.
And how and what was wrong changed on a daily basis, but we were committed to stopping people from doing the wrong thing. So maybe one day I would say, that man's not comfortable. He should be hugged, whether he wants to be or not. And the next day, someone would share about a fourth step that they wrote a life history. And I would say, well, that's not what the book says. Clearly, the book talks about resentments, fear, and sexual attitudes, not life history. And I would condemn them publicly for their own good, of course.
Of
For the
course.
purity and goodness of AA. So yes, I am much more aware on a much more particular level about that which does not sit with my psyche and my spiritual beliefs and my practices today. But in an also in a real sense, it has broadened who and what I am, and what I'm that I'm much more. I'm broadened in the sense that I allow others to do what they need to do.
Belief in God and participation in religious practice is on the decline at a very fast rate, certainly in Europe, a little bit less so in the United States, but catching up. In Israel, I think there's a lot of that going on as well. So speak, if you could, to young people who are coming into the program. You know, and what is it that religion? Somebody said, you know, the only thing more dangerous than religion is no religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were on to something, that this is, and more people are without participation in religion. Is that's true over there in Israel as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think in general it is. I happen to live in Jerusalem, which is a pretty religious city, both
Yeah.
The centers of certainly the center in Israel of it's of both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's so I probably live in a very skewed, you know.
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
I don't have probably the cleanest overall, picture of that, but I think in general, yes. Look, I think that it's hard when someone sees the kind of people seem to zero in on the scolding part of religion,
Yes.
the what makes you not rather than what makes you. I want to advocate for a spiritual freedom in the form. The form provides the freedom. For me, before I had the form of a religious context, I lacked the ability to kind of fly because I didn't know where I was or how I sat. When I was an actor and living in Los Angeles and working at all the little jobs I had because I didn't have work in my chosen profession, I always had to hold back a little. I don't, maybe they'd give me 24 days in a row in the restaurant or I'd be driving a car for, 12 hours a day. I always had to hold back a little energy because I knew I didn't know when my next day of rest was coming. Once it was established that every Friday I was going to take a day of rest until every Saturday from sundown to sundown, I'm free to kind of attack the week in a way to bring my fullness to the week in a way that I didn't when I didn't know where my next rest was coming from. And I believe that in the form of religion, there can be great freedom. It doesn't always happen, and it can be sidetracked very easily. And I agree that religious people don't always hold the highest, they don't always behave as well as they should. There's a great quote of the of the Berdichev Rebbe, the Rebbe Levi Yitzhak from Berdichev, a Hasidic rabbi that lived in the late 1700s in Ukraine. And he is said to have said to the town atheist. It's also attributed to Rav Kook, who was an Israel-based rabbi before the state existed. The quote is this: "The God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either." And I always say that to newcomers in AA, and I would say it to if I was ever asked to speak to a group of young people about religion, I would say that were hesitant over what they see and what they don't see in religious life. I love that quote. The God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about punishment. I'm not talking about no, why aren't you doing the right thing? I'm not talking about God disguised as Santa Claus. I'm talking about spiritual freedom. I'm talking about finding our soul. I think part of the reason that people don't, explore that is the state of the world today. Nobody's allowed to feel what they feel. There's a pill, there's a thing, there's this, there's a 6-day program, a 3-track program, a 2-question program to fix the human condition. And I think a great way to fix the human condition is to live a life of humanity. I think that's, I've wanted to include this quote in this talk till now, and I'm going to push it sideways a little. Dr. Carl Jung wrote to Bill Wilson about Roland. Roland was the guy who brought the message to Ebby. Ebby brought the message to Bill. Finally, Bill brought the message to Bob, and we had Alcoholics Anonymous.
Right.
2 generations back in that tumbling, Roland was a guy who spent a year in Dr. Jung's care in Switzerland, got drunk on the way home. But Dr. Jung wrote this of Roland, and I think it's true of us. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness. Expressed in medieval language, the union with God. I believe with all my heart that alcohol was a spiritual solution. It's not, he ends the letter by saying, you see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as mantra spiritum. It's not by accident that I sought to fix my causes and conditions, my underlying problems with alcohol, i.e. spirits. And now the lasting solution in my life has been a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, which has gone on to manifest as a religious experience.
Yes. And that's what the religions are there to do, is to channel that energy and that connection to people in a way that they can experience it and find fulfillment.
Right. I think religion actually has a greater challenge because the people that come to religion haven't almost been killed. We talk about John Barleycorn, i.e. alcohol, being the great persuader.
Absolutely.
Of why you should live a spiritual life. Not everyone that goes to church or to synagogue has that kind of compelling push on the back of their head.
Right, right. My first sponsor said, if we don't get it, we burn out. If they don't get it, they rust out.
Right.
And there's the difference.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, Yisrael, I want to thank you so sincerely on behalf of everyone who's listening for the wisdom that you've given us, for the journey that you have traveled, for the balance that you have found in life. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Israel works as in the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and also as a stand-up comic, balancing the tragedy of the human condition with the hope and the laughter and the meaning and the purpose. You have found that balance in your life, and it's just a beautiful thing to see and to share in. So I thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the conversation. And I hope we get to talk again.
I hope so as well. Yisrael and I wanted to abide by the tradition, so we were not going to give his last name. But two things I do want to say is if you want to get in touch with him, please feel free to write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com, and I will very happily forward it directly to him. I might not even read it if you don't want me to do so. But I'll definitely get it over to him. And the second thing is Israel has some of his stand-up comedy on YouTube. And again, you will find that on YouTube. Just put in Yisrael, Y, and then Israel, Yisrael, on YouTube. Put in AA, and it'll show up. But you have to put in Yisrael, and his last name is like a can of soup. I'm not going to say it, but it's like a can of soup, and it's not Heinz or that, but it begins with a C, and you're on your own. And if you get stuck, give me a call, and I'll be happy to share it with you. It's funnier than all get out, and
Thank you very
you're
much.
doing
Thank you.
great work there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. I'm tracking down a Hindu for next next week, and a man from Dallas got in touch with me. It was amazing. Where am I going to find a Hindu? You know, and son of a gun if he doesn't just write asking a question about a workshop. So God is good. God is good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening. God bless, and
very
keep
much.
coming back.
Okay, thank you. And anyone out there, please feel free to be in touch. It would be
All
my
right.
honor.
Shalom, my friend.
Shalom. Shalom.